For our synagogues to be anything other than an offense to the Lord, they must be places of radical welcome. And I want to reiterate again, I'm not here speaking about any particular denomination. Nobody has a monopoly on exclusion. We're all excellent at it. And nobody has a monopoly on inclusion. There are very few precious examples in every denomination. The issue is, are we going to throw our weight behind the values of Torah and the values of inclusion, which to my mind are one and the same? So let me just say something that I say often. I think truthfully my students can give this part of the speech all by themselves. There are two key stories in the Torah. The first story in the Torah is that God is love. And to be able to actualize love, you must have an object which you can share love with. You cannot give love if you're the only thing that is. So God creates an entire cosmos to be capable of bestowing love. And we, made in God's image, are most like the divine when we are giving and receiving love. The second great story in the Torah is the one we are in the process of celebrating and remembering now. And that is that in the age-old war between pharaohs and abominable slaves, God always, always, always takes the side of the slaves. It is no coincidence that the liberation movements of all around the globe tell our story. It is no coincidence that the language of freedom is equal. So, a God who loves as an expression of God's truest nature and therefore creates undeservedly. A God who strikes down pharaohs and brings out the poor and the despised and the marginalized. Those are the two stories of our tradition. And everything else is a pedagogical tool to reinforce those two lessons. Anytime any of us do anything that is not in the service of those two lessons, we are sinning against God and betraying our tradition. So, pragmatically, that means the following. It means we cannot do enough to reach out to people who don't fit the standard mold and bring them in, not just for their sake, but for our own. We are diminished when our diversity is excluded. We are not the people Israel if large chunks of our people cannot be present. I have had clergy and educators say to me, Rabbi, that's all very well and good, but we just don't have special needs people in our community. Okay? What that means is that they have gotten your message loud and clear. Right? I can tell you this as the parent of a special needs child. If you're ever lacking in anger, I can give you some of my surplus rage. And if you're ever lacking in stress or burden, I have plenty of that to share too. Right? The reason you're not seeing any special needs families in your congregation is because they're anticipating your rejection and they're saving themselves the additional frustration, pain, and sense of betrayal. Besides which, you can probably trust that some of your colleagues have already told them that they're not welcome in a whole lot of ways. The way the Jewish community says your child is garbage is to say, we would love to make a place for Jacob, we're just not equipped to serve him. And that translates, let me be clear, into your son is trash. Right? More charitably, what it means is your son won't give us a return on our investment. But notice that's just one step away from your son is trash. So special needs families have been taught to stay away. Don't bother. Because what it would take to make our institutions truly inclusive would be changing the architecture. It would mean changing the service. It would mean utilizing technology differently. It would mean opening up our educational methods. It would mean telling parents who don't want their kid to study with some other kid, well, I'm sorry, but we're not equipped to help your child. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. So the last thing I want to say in this stage, and then I do want to take your comments and questions if there's time for that, you tell me, is I want to reiterate, this is not about changing policy. This is not about expending enormous sums of money. This is a simple commitment that we will welcome anyone. That's all. We'll welcome anyone. Now, what that means, we're going to need to talk to you about. Believe you me, I am not one of those people who says that the parents of special needs children are always right. Alana knows that I generally refer to those people as the special needs parents of special needs children. Right? When Jacob was younger, one of the ways that my wife used to torture me is she used to make us go to support groups. I can't imagine who felt supported at those groups. I always felt incredibly burdened by the end because you watched all of these special needs parents bemoaning their awful state to each other, such that by the time you left the room, you just wanted to kill yourself, but you didn't have the energy. As opposed to the times where I was truly inspired, where I was most inspired was when it was Jacob and me alone. Jacob and I know this is going to be culturally insensitive, we have this big body of salt water right near where we live, and during the summer months it's actually warm, so we go into it. It's called an ocean. You have something like it at Jones Beach. If you go right past where everyone is clustered to the other side of that sand dune where there's a stretch of sand and water and no people whatsoever because they're all by the little huts, that thing is called a beach. Californians go there often. And Jacob and I, from March to November, we are up to our necks in Pacific Ocean. And the great thing about hanging out with someone with autism is there's no chit-chat. Right? Jacob doesn't have the capacity to say nonsense. So when he talks, he's saying something significant, and most of the time, he doesn't talk. Oh, what a relief. So, Jacob and I spend hours not speaking except for periodically to say hug or kiss or to sing a song. There's always room for that. Right? I never feel that Jacob has a disability when it's him and me. The only time I feel his disability is when other people are in the room trying to cram him into their expectations. So here's the last thing I want to say. There are no special needs. There are no special needs. But some people need additional assistance to have their typical needs met. Everyone get that? There are no special needs. All of us need exactly the same thing. Some of us have different tools that are required to have our typical needs met. If the Jewish community cannot reorient itself such that it meets the typical needs of all of its members, then it deserves to continue to wither away. All right, last thing, I promise, and then I'm over to you. Here's the interesting thing I want to bring you about Jewish demographic statistics. This, by the way, is the only thing in the world more depressing than a support group for special needs parents. It turns out that that denomination, which is doing the best, is the Orthodox denomination. They're staying the same size. Not growing, not shrinking. Turns out, not growing is kicking butt in the Jewish world these days, because the other denominations are all in a race for who can shrink fastest. It used to be that the Reform movement was triumphal next to the conservative movement, but thank God those days have stopped, because it's as bleak for them as it is for us. Except for the following. Do you know which group of Jews is growing at the most rapid rate? Not religious. They are boom times. Right? Now that doesn't mean not spiritual. They're in ashrams, they're meditating, they're doing yoga, they're doing all kinds of things. They're just not affiliating with our institutions. I wonder if that has to do with the odd reality that Americans think they shouldn't have to fight to be welcome. And in the age of the iPod, where you don't have to listen to the DJ's choice of music, you can listen to the music you want to when you listen to it, and that's a good thing. I'm saying that because people who are 50 and older like to get all moralistic about that, as if it's a bad thing to not have to listen to someone else's choice of music. Or you get to listen to a class when you want to listen to it, until you're not interested, and then you stop. That's terrible. That destroys community, says someone 50 or older. I've never understood that. Right? That's the world we live in. And I think those Jews are voting with their feet. And I think if we want to win them back, if it's not good enough to just stay the same size, if we actually want to grow, then we need to look at where those Jews are going. Those Jews are going to places where they practice welcome as a way of living in the world, in which people are not met with judgment and exclusionary standards, and the implicit belief that if you don't live in the right neighborhood or have the right number of titles after your name, then somehow you don't count. If you don't look a certain way, if you don't hang with the right kind of people, right? We have so many of those expectations, and it is killing us. And you know what? We deserve to die. If that's who we are, then the smart among us are leaving. You may not tell this joke very much, but in California we love to say, you know that most of the Jews from California originated in Brooklyn. And when they left Brooklyn and moved to California, they raised the IQ in both places. In California, I have to tell that twice before we right? So I think it is true that the smart ones are leaving us. The ones who say, I don't have time to live in a shadow. I don't have time to wait for welcoming communities. If you want to pack them in, and this is true, look at the places where people are packing them in. It's places that are militantly and relentlessly welcoming. And that's our charge. Thank you very much.